Okay, if we're ready to make a start, then um, thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name's Erica Helps. For those who I haven't met before, I'm the Debt Commissioning Lead here at MAPS. Um, Today's event is a roundup of all of the communications that we've been giving over the last month or so through in-person events across the North West, West Midlands, East Midlands and Yorkshire and Humber, bringing all of that insight together and kind of giving some updates on some of the things that we've learned along the way. So just in terms of our approach today, apologies, it's a very, very odd angle to be looking at you from. I'm trying to juggle between my phone, a laptop, and a desktop screen as well. So forgive me if I'm kind of looking in different directions as I'm talking to you. But we have been running these events. We did six events across those regions recently, so it's a chance for us to kind of bring the same content to people who are in those areas which are not being commissioned this financial year but next year, and for anybody who hasn't been able to attend any of the in-person events to kind of catch up on the same content. In terms of how our session's running today, we've got presentations around the eligibility criteria and the application process and the draft questions. There'll be a number of Slidos which are open during that particular session, which my colleague James will introduce. If you have any questions outside of those processes or at any point during the presentations, please do put them in the chat and we'll pick them up either as we go through the presentations, if that's possible or helpful to do, or we'll have a Q&A session at the end, so we'll come back and pick up any outstanding questions and answer those that we're able to cover. After the presentation around eligibility and application criteria, we move into the service design fundamentals and our approach to technology. We've got a thematic session on partnership formation, governance and management. So thinking about some of the practical questions that you need to think about before you go into your grant applications and also during the live running of the grants. And there's a session on workforce wellbeing and development, and a wrap up with a session looking at finances, cross partnerships, and then there's that wrap up, some final information, and we'll cover off any of those questions that are arising. So in terms of how we're going through today, the purpose is really to cover those practical questions, the key areas that you'll need to work through for the application process and the application itself, and then looking at those issues and considerations that will help not only the application process for the grant, but about making sure that you've got all of the key foundations in place for effective delivery of services during the live running of the grant, should your application be successful. We think it's been really, really helpful, all the sessions that we've run in person. The collaboration has been absolutely fantastic. The ideas shared in the room has really helped the thinking for potential partners, but also for us to make sure that the approach is as strong as possible and the applications will be as strong as possible as we go through. So in terms of where we are in the process, we have been going through market engagement now for a total of 15 months. So if you stayed with us throughout that process, thank you for that, because you've really helped to inform the process and the kind of design of the grants, and you're continuing to do that through participating in these sessions. So we did initial feedback, market engagement and feedback back in December and January, December 24 through to February 25. We then did a series of in-person events, which many of you attended through July to September of last year. Working on kind of what our lotting approach would be, our potential delivery models and the eligibility and the application process, the outline application process at that stage. We did some more deep dives in the last couple of months run up to Christmas, and opened an expression of interest process where we received a number of expressions of interest in December. it's fair to say that that application expression of interest process is still open. So anybody who is interested in potentially stepping forward as a lead grant applicant in their area is still very welcome to submit an expression of interest, and particularly for those regions and sub-regions which are not being competed this financial year. Oh, sorry, next financial year. So we're in our last stage of market engagement for those areas that are in round one. That's this session, which is covering the eligibility criteria, the application process and weightings, and also the partnership development areas. There's reference there to expert support. That expert support will be in the form of some sessions taking place as webinars, which are going to provide support, independent support for bid writing. Anybody who's interested in joining an event and a webinar session around bid writing support is very welcome to do so. We expect to have a limited number of places, which will be communicated through our usual social channels, but also through our stakeholder list. So those sessions will be taking place in March of this year. Dates to be confirmed, but we'll communicate those as soon as we can. And then in the spring of this year, James will say more about the actual timeline for the competition process, but for round one areas, the competition process will open in the spring, and we'll also then move to focus some in-person market engagement with those round two areas. So we'll be coming out and doing some in-person sessions in areas which are scheduled to take place and be competed next year. So if you want to move us on to the next, thanks, James. So back in 2024, you were part of a consultation process which looked at what our approach should be to taking forward our debt work in future. Feedback from the consultation was published in autumn 2024 and is still on our website. Essentially, the things that you told us through that consultation process were that a high commercial, price and volume driven environment risks squeezing out what makes community-based debt advice really effective. All of the good things that we know about community-based debt advice, that it's reaching customers where they are, or clients where they are, and that they're well connected with other services. You asked for an inclusive approach, reflective of the capacity of your organisations to engage, and you told us that, you know, by over standardising an approach, there was a risk that we could damage the diversity that exists within the sector if we look to make everybody deliver services in the same way. So we've really tried to make our approach as individualised, as locally relevant and as tailored as possible, and we'll say a little bit more about that as we go through today's session. We've continued that collaborative approach. We've seen change to our requirements as we've gone through the last 14 months. Anybody who has kind of kept pace with the engagement that we've done or reviewed some of the video content that's on our community-based debt advice webpage will have seen some of the changes and amends that we've made along the way, and we'll do more of that after we've reflected from all of these sessions. So if you want to take us on to that next slide, thanks, James. So just in terms of managing expectations, from our side, we are really clear that at this stage, as we're going into that final stage, there are lots of things that we can discuss, lots of things that we will talk about, but what we won't do is absolutely give you a prescriptive approach to what you must do or should include in your particular proposal. We won't endorse or promote any specific models. Our aim is not to provide a complete checklist of everything you absolutely need to consider. So some of the content that's within this slide deck, some of the things that we'll talk about this afternoon, they are prompts for you to reflect on and consider, but to only take forward things that are appropriate in your particular areas. So our ask from you really is that you are prepared to kind of reflect what works well within your organisation, within any other programmes that you're currently delivering, and also to tell us about kind of things that have been difficult in other areas and that we should be avoiding as we go through our commissioning process. Tell us about any challenges that you've experienced, lessons learned, any aspects of the application process which you think would be particularly difficult, or anything around the delivery models which could be problematic, and please do kind of listen to and respect other people's viewpoints. The really important thing here is to say that this is a new service. It's a change, an opportunity to change from the services as they've been delivered over the last sort of 20 years. So we really would encourage you to kind of challenge your thinking about what is currently in place and what the future might look like, and to consider some of the questions that are raised here in this deck. So in terms of some of those key principles for this grant scheme, anybody who has been with us previously will be aware that we want to provide long-term funding for stability. We're looking at up to 9-year grants, so 5-year initial term plus up to 4 years. So a really long period of time to make sure that you have the opportunity to kind of platform your services and to change in a way that is meeting the needs of your customers, your clients and your communities. Sorry, I've been reading something else about which has used the word customers today, so forgive me. Your clients are the people who you will be serving through this service. We've really talked about taking the time that we need to get this right, giving you time to engage with the process, building on your expertise, your understanding of what's needed locally. We've talked about being transparent and fair, and I think I would hope that we have done that so far. We've communicated our decisions, we've shared the process, and we've given you the opportunity to feed back on all of the component parts of this grant application process. We've also said that volumes are not the only thing that's important. So we recognise that there are a range of measures, including the quality of the service that's delivered, the outcomes that you're achieving for clients. All of those things are important, and not just volumes. We're really investing in relationships based on trust. So we know that you are in the same position as we are. You want the best outcomes for clients, the best access to services that is possible within the funding envelope that is available. And we recognise that you can do that by working effectively in partnership, so that clients get access to the services which help them, not only the debt advice services, but the complementary service that can help them to get better debt outcomes. So in doing that, we really want to make sure that we are leaving room for diversity of service provision and flexible approaches which meet the needs of clients and work for you as debt advice providers. So we've talked a lot about meeting you as a sector where you are right now. There is no expectation that there is overnight change in terms of the shape and form of services, but we want to make sure that we build on kind of good services, good foundations, and also get the change where it's effective and appropriate to do that. So we really want to play to the existing strengths of your services. At the same time, though, we don't want to limit your ambition. So it is that next slide, James, thanks. We really are keen that wherever possible, if you think there are things which need to change, you've had experience of running MAPS funded debt advice services over a long period of time, or working with other funders, and you think there are things which could be done better through flexible funding, which can be spent effectively based on local understanding and local need, then we would encourage you to do that. So we are definitely putting the money there for the long term and making sure that you can do the change at any change at a rate that is appropriate. So in terms of the support that we will provide, we want to make sure that we are supporting your success, giving you the tools and the support to be able to do any transition at a pace that's right for you, and that will be continuing throughout the lifetime of the grants. So we'll work with our own support with our own colleagues here at MAPS to work with you around change, around quality, around any aspects of your services which you want to develop over time in order to deliver the best services for clients. So that's a bit of a kind of quick run through in terms of where we've been and kind of what our ambitions are for this service. I'm going to hand you over to James now, who's going to take us through the eligibility criteria and application process. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Erica. Yes, so this session, there's four main things I'm going to cover. I'm going to talk through, outline the competition process from end to end and what you can expect at each stage. I'm going to outline the timelines and key milestones for round one. I appreciate many people on the call are more interested in round two, so I'll touch on that as well. We'll then talk about the eligibility criteria. Now, Erica and I did a video on these before Christmas, which is still available on the CBDA webpage, but I'll give you an overview of the eligibility criteria. And there's a couple of areas where we'll still like your views, so we'll touch on that. And then spend a bit of time exploring the draft application questions, both at stage one and at stage two. And when I go through these slides, I'll pull upon what we've heard to date at the in-person events, the key feedback we've heard and the changes we're likely to make as a consequence. But we're really keen today to hear from you as well. So do please tell us your views, where you need more guidance, clarification, and so on. So we're going to start with process and timeline. So for each of these sections, we've set up a Slido, which hopefully people on the call are familiar with. If you're not, just use your phones to scan the QR code you can see, or go to slido.com and put in the code at the top of your screen. You can submit as many comments as you like. Everything will be anonymous. By all means, put your name to it if you want to. That's completely up to you. And then if you're like me and a bit of a reflector, you have got opportunity later this week up to the end of Friday to continue to use Slido to submit your comments if you need more time to address some of the content we're going through. So I'm going to talk through the process and timeline slides now. The things to think about that we're interested in are really any queries or concerns you've got with the proposed process or timeline. If there's any pinch points or competing demands that we should be aware of before we absolutely finalise the timelines. For example, is there another big funding opportunity that you're pursuing that clashes with this one? If so, let us know. There's still some flexibility to change the timelines if we need to. And then finally, what additional guidance or resources would you like from us to make this whole process simpler for you? So think about that as I go through the slides. Use Slido as much as you like to submit those comments, and then we'll pause at the end of this and see what's coming through. So what you can see on the slide now is an overview of the process. I'll come on to the bits in yellow shortly, but essentially, stage process. Stage one starts with you submitting your stage one application, where you'll confirm your eligibility to be the applicant, and you'll submit a high-level version of your proposal. And what that will entail, I'll come on to a bit later on to talk about. Then from our side, we complete the due diligence checks, we assess the eligibility, we look at your proposal, and then we intend to shortlist up to 3 bids per lot to take through to stage two. Stage two then commences with an online meeting where we'll give you further feedback on your stage one submission, and we'll explain the stage two process in more detail. Then it's back to you to go away and write and submit your detailed draft proposal and budget breakdown, which you'll then review and provide feedback. The changes we're making, as you can see in the slide, are a result of some of the feedback we've heard. That what we intend to do is to provide you that feedback verbally during the dialogue meeting, which is an informal part of the process. It's not scored, but it's an opportunity for us to tell us what we think your strengths are, where areas of development are with your bid, and have an open discussion with you. It's an opportunity for you to get clarification from us as well. And then the output of that will be a full meeting note, along with all our feedback, all in one place. And then that output is for you to do with as you see fit. Hopefully, take on board some of the feedback you've been given, and then you go and submit your final submission. And it's that final submission that gets formally and fully assessed and moderated ahead of decisions being made. So that's a process. In terms of the timelines associated with that, so this is the timeline for round one. We haven't yet nailed down the timelines for round two, but it's safe to assume it will look very similar to this. but it'll be 12 months further on. But we'll confirm that later this calendar year, once we've got those dates confirmed. But the way it's going to work for round one, in early April, we intend to publish on the CBDA webpage all the documentation you need to be aware of ahead of this competition. So that will include the guidance notes, the application pack, the application questions, the grant funding agreement, everything in there being one place for you. For that 5-week period, you can see in the grey block. But then we're not going to open the Stage 1 application window until the 11th of May. And there's 2 reasons for that. Firstly, before we can open that window, we need sign-off from both DWP and Treasury. And we're anticipating getting that at some point in April. So we need to wait for that to come through. And also, we've been advised by government to avoid launching the competition around the period of the local elections. This year, the local elections in England are the 7th of May. Hence, we're going to wait till the 11th of May to open the Stage 1 application window. That's our block in light blue. That's a 4-week window for you to get your submission to us. We'll then assess, peer review, and host that feedback meeting with you to kickstart the Stage 2 process. You've then got just over 5 weeks, that light purple block, to submit your draft proposal in full, which we'll review, we'll prepare the feedback, and then we'll host that dialogue meeting with you. And then from the date of the dialogue meeting taking place, you'll have a further full 5 weeks to submit your final application, which will then assess and moderate and make decisions. So we're looking to complete this process, as you can see, this side of Christmas. What we can't yet confirm is exactly when we'll be able to announce the decisions we make. For the moment, we finish the moderation. It needs to go through internal governance and MAPS. It then needs to go back to government, DWP and Treasury to get their sign-off. So it's likely to be April time before we can announce the awards, but we certainly want to conclude the process this calendar year. And just to flag that the bits in peach on the screen are just school holidays. That's when we appreciate this peak holiday season for most organisations. We can't avoid those periods, but we're trying to kind of share the burden. So certainly for August, we'll take the hit our side. That's when we'll be doing our work rather than you having to. So that's the end-to-end process as it stands. The particular dates I've touched on are on this slide. The only change to what we sent out with the in-person events is we said we'd publish the documentation on the 6th of April. The 6th of April is, in fact, Bank Holiday Monday, Easter Monday. So it won't be the 6th, it'll be sometime that week, probably the 7th. We'll get that information on the website. The Stage 1 application period, as I say, will open 11th of May. The draft application window will be the 6th of July. That's when it will open. And then the final submission window will open on the 21st of September. So that's the timelines as they stand. Happy to pause now for questions. Erica, is there anything coming through Slido or the chat you can answer?
Apologies, James. I'm still struggling with my multiple chats and multiple screens. We have had a couple of comments, an appreciation of the fact that there is an opportunity for feedback. So that's been welcomed. There's also an ask about where will the documents be published. So in terms of, I'm happy to pick up on that one. In terms of where the draft documents will be published at the beginning of April, they will be published on our community-based Debt Advice webpage. They will also be a message that goes out to everybody who's registered an interest in the process on our stakeholder list to flag that those have been published. The actual competition documents, the final version, the final draft, will be published through our ATMIS portal, which is the commercial portal that MAPS uses, because that's where competition documents and communications during a live process need to be submitted. So there will be a kind of change, but they will be generally accessible in terms of those draft documents in April through our community-based Debt Advice webpage.
Okay, great. Shall I move on to eligibility for now?
Sorry, and one other comment already received, which is 5 weeks is not long if partners need to get together. That's come through the Slido. And we've also got a question from Alice, who would like to come on camera. We're very happy to do that, Alice. I'll just need to work out the tech. Give us 2 minutes. I'll let James answer that question first while we unmute you.
Yeah, so yeah, the application window, you're right, is 5 weeks. But because we're publishing all the documentation at the start of April, that's when your work can start, or you can start now, in fact, in terms of forming partnership. So there's plenty of time built in. It's just the window for actually submitting the application on Atomis is limited to 5 weeks, which we think is sufficient. But if that's problematic, we can look at that.
Alice, did you want to come on camera and ask?
I'm not going to put my camera on.
You don't have to put your camera on.
Yeah, it tends to interfere with Teams. Sorry, and the whole thing then just goes down. I don't know if it's to do with being in the very west of Cornwall, which our internet connection isn't that great. So I was just wondering, and sorry if this is probably in the contract, maybe in somewhere in, a lot of written detail. I'm dyslexic. I struggle to read a lot of detailed written detail until I know I need to. If you saw what I mean, then I will pay my very close attention to it. I'm just wondering, because it looks like there's going to be a certain amount of collaboration needed between like lead organisations, ones that want to be, the leads, and the organisations that will be working with them. Will there be sort of equality of inputs there in terms of, will the lead organisations have the same sort of say on how things are run? Because I think you pointed out earlier on, organisations, LCAs, etc., we have very set ways of running our projects that we've been doing for years and years and years, and we're probably going to come across, differences in ideas about quality, differences in ideas about how to run projects procedurally. And I suppose what I'm concerned about is if we are, as we probably won't be a lead organisation ourselves, if we have concerns and they aren't sort of necessarily answered or followed up by the lead organisations, is there any way of getting those concerns across? Like if the lead organisation is saying, well, we think things should be run in a different way, and we think, well, sorry if that's already answered somewhere, but
it's not yet, Alice. It speaks to some of the things that we're going to be talking about in the later part of this webinar. So about how you sort out your partnership arrangements and about what the relationship is between potential lead organisations and potential delivery partners. So a lot of that is to be kind of ironed out locally. For areas like the Southwest and others who are in that second round, we will be doing some more in-person events so that we can start to talk through those things and to support locally about kind of what the challenges are. They will be different in different places, but definitely the partnership formation will be key to how things operate, from the beginning of the grants through into the longer term when delivery is kind of over to you as the local delivery partners.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I put my question particularly brilliantly, but you did answer it very well all the same, so thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, you picked up on it. Yeah, you kind of picked up on what I was trying to say. Sorry, I've got a really bad flu at the moment, so my head's a bit fuzzy, but thank you.
No problem at all. Okay. All right, James, I'll let you get back to your next section.
Fine. Yeah, thank you. So as I said, that Slido will remain open for the rest of the week. So if anything else occurs to you, please do put your comments in that. But I'm moving on to eligibility now. So there's a separate Slido for this. So it's a separate QR code you can scan or go to slido.com and put the new code in at the top of the screen. As I go through this, we're keen to understand if there's anything I cover that still remains unclear, whether there's any criteria we go through that is problematic to your organisation that could potentially exclude you from coming forward as being a lead. We're going to talk a bit about cyber insurance as personal security checks as potential additional eligibility criteria. So I'll come on to that, and we're really keen to get some feedback from you as to what your position is with those. That will make more sense in a minute. And then we'll finish again, any other guidance or resource or help we can provide in this space, do let us know and we can provide that for you. So other things to think about. So eligibility criteria is quite standard for any grant competition. To include these, it ensures fairness, it helps us target the right type of recipients. It's a time saver on both sides. If we can stop applicants that are going to be ineligible from coming forward, it saves them time, it saves us time. But it's a really important part to ensure compliance, to help us reduce risk, because at the end of the day, there's a large amount of public funding being administered here, so we need to make sure we do that safely and appropriately. The slides you can see on the right-hand side of your screen now are the slides we shared at the in-person events we held last summer. And those events were really helpful to us because across the board, every event, and with the survey as well, it became really clear that there was two sticky points here, two contentious issues where people had major concerns about our proposed approach at the time. So one was around turnover thresholds. There were a recurring concern in terms of being a potential barrier for participation, particularly for smaller delivery partners. And the other issue with Cyber Essentials Plus, in terms of the time, the cost and the resource it takes to get certified in that. So we listened really carefully to what we've heard, we've reconsidered, and we've come forward now with an alternative approach for both those areas, which I'll touch on now. But as I say, that video we did before Christmas will provide you a bit more detail if you need it. So in terms of financial thresholds, again, they're quite typical in the grant competition to have these. They're a way to help us understand the financial stability and the financial health of the applicant organisations to make sure you're appropriate to public funding and you're stable both at the start of the project and ideally for the whole duration of the grant period, which in this case is 5 years minimum, potentially 9 years. So it is important to look at the financials. The approach we were going to take, and the approach we proposed back in the summer, was that the revenue of the lead organisation should be somewhere in the region of ×1 and ×1.5 the value of the annual lot value. And we heard pretty strongly from you that actually that was problematic. And even if we were to impose that at the lower level of ×1, it would greatly reduce the number of organisations that could step up to be lead. So we've reconsidered based on the feedback you provided us. And the approach we're going to take is on the screen. Essentially, the headline is we're going to remove the requirement for there to be a minimum financial threshold met at stage 1. Instead, we'll be asking the lead applicants at stage 1 to submit their previous 3 years of audited accounts. Plus, if you know at stage 1 who your key delivery partners are likely to be, and by key delivery partners, we're defining that as any partner that you're likely to give a sub-grant to of around £250,000 per year or more, then we'd really like to see their accounts as well as early as possible. And then as part of the stage 1 due diligence, we'll look at the ratios. If you meet the 1-to-1 revenue ratio, brilliant, all is good. But if you don't, it's not a problem. There's some other ratios that have been shared with us by the government commercial function that are particularly relevant for the VCSE sector. We'll run those ratios. Again, if the thresholds are not met, there's not a problem. The headline is that no applicant's going to be excluded at stage 1 due to financial queries. Instead, what we'll do, if the bid stacks up and you're one of the shortlisted organisations, as part of the stage 1 feedback, we'll confirm where our financial queries and concerns are with your organisation, and then you'll have the stage 2 process to give us the assurance we need that actually your organisation is financially stable and healthy. And that could be through a combination of supplementary assurance or guarantors or any other evidence you can provide. So there's an opportunity there for you to give us the assurance we need. And then we'll do the final and formal financial health assessment at stage 2. So that's our approach to financial thresholds now. The other area was Cyber Essentials Plus. So obviously cybersecurity is a massive issue globally. If the likes of Marks and Spencers and the Co-op can get hacked, we all can be. So MAPS are taking this really seriously. And the stance we're taking, and this is a red line, we are absolutely going to stick to this, that every project we fund going forward will need to get Cyber Essentials Plus, for the reasons you can see on the screen there. However, we're changing our approach as to when you'll need it. So we originally said at the events last summer, which is the statement in italics on the screen, is that all lead applicants would need to be Cyber Essentials Plus certified at point of stage 1 application, and all other delivery partners at point of delivery. Again, we heard clearly from you that that was problematic, and so we've changed our stance. So The approach is going to be for Cyber Essentials Plus. For all lead organisations and key delivery partners, we'll need a commitment from you at stage 1 that you're going to work towards Cyber Essentials Plus certification, but you don't need to be certified until the mobilisation phase. Now, the mobilisation phase for round 1 is summer 27. For round 2, it's summer 28. So there's plenty of time. But also, because you don't need to get certified until the mobilisation phase, it means you can use, that's after the award's been issued. So potentially you can use some of the award funding to meet the costs associated with that. So you will absolutely need Cyber Essentials Plus, but not quite yet. And then the position for any other sub-grantees or contractors handling sensitive personal data, again, we need a commitment that they'll work towards Cyber Essentials Plus with stage 1. They won't need to be certified until point of delivery, which for the majority of round 1 partners will be April 28. For round 2 will be April 29. So again, there's plenty of time to do that. Any other partners you're working with that are not handling sensitive or personal data obviously won't need to comply with Cyber Essentials Plus. So that's our approach on those 2 sticky issues, and we'll, please do put your comments in Slido. We'll come back to that in a minute. The other eligibility criteria we've shared previously, we've not had much pushback or concerns raised with these, but if anything jumps out, do tell us. What I've tried to do on this slide is outline what the requirement is, who needs to meet that requirement and at what stage, a bit of the rationale, and then what evidence is likely to be required. So in terms of FCA authorisation, at stage 1, we need the lead to hold FCA authorisation or to have achieved minded to approve status. We won't need that for other debt advice providers until stage 2, but if you have it at stage 1, let us have it. It's one less thing we need to consider at stage 2. Similarly, in terms of quality standards, at stage 1, we need the lead applicant to hold the MAPS accredited quality standard or commit to holding it by point of award. And that's the stage 2 requirement for other debt advice providers. We need the lead applicant to be delivering FCA regulated debt advice, and that needs to be evidenced at stage 1. The insurance levels, as per we've presented previously, we've not had any pushback on these, so they're likely to stand as they are. And we'll need evidence that the lead can meet those requirements at stage 1 and the other debt advice providers at stage 2. And then in terms of data protection and GDPR requirements, again, we'll need to ensure the lead can comply with those at stage 1 and all other partners at stage 2. You can see in the evidence column that a lot of this is going to be self-certified, so you tell us whether you meet this or not. We won't expect you to evidence this at stage 1, but just be mindful if you are ultimately successful and you're awarded the grant, then we'll need to see evidence of all this in due course. 2 more. Governance, I talked about previous 3 years of audited accounts already. We'll also be looking at information available to us on Companies House and or the Charities Commission. And then the final requirement is something called the Supplier Security Assessment Questionnaire, the SSAQ. This isn't something for now, but it's something else that will be required where you ultimately to be successful. It's another requirement we'll need you to do, so just be aware of it, but it won't be a part of the initial application process. So they were the eligibility criteria we've talked about previously. There's 2 others that we're discussing internally at the moment, and we're really keen to get views on this because we've not yet come to a definitive position. The first one is cyber insurance. There's a feeling from senior colleagues internally at MAPS that we should be expecting as an eligibility criteria for all providers of debt advice to be cyber insured. What the level is, there's a suggestion on the screen there, as you can see, it doesn't have to be that level necessarily. But what we're trying to do through the in-person events and today is to get a feel for how problematic would that be if we impose that as a criteria for you. We want to get a better feel for how many organisations currently have cyber insurance. What does it cost? We know it can be costly. We also know that the costs come down markedly once you get Cyber Essentials Plus. So we're not yet settled on a position here. Any information you can provide in this space will help us come to a decision, and we'll communicate that as soon as we've made it. And similarly, in terms of personnel security requirements, this came from DWP. And there's a desire for all staff and client-facing roles to be CRB checked, DBS checked. Again, we don't know quite what's happening in the sector at the moment. Is that standard anyway, therefore it's not a problem, or is that going to create a problem for organisations potentially wanting to come forward to be part of this? So again, any intel on any of that would really help us as we shape and determine exactly what this requirement is going to be going forward. So that, Eric, as well, is going to cover on eligibility. Should we pause for questions again?
Yes, thanks, James. It is worth saying on the cyber insurance point that we've been made aware during the process of doing these events that Citizens Advice, as a national organisation, has got insurance in place for its local Citizens Advice members. So there is cyber insurance available. I'm not sure that how widely that is understood across the network based on some of the feedback that we've had, but thought that was worth sharing. So there are a few questions and comments on this, James. First one is just, could you reiterate the position around that one-to-one revenue threshold again, please?
Yeah, certainly. I appreciate it's quite confusing on this slide. So financial thresholds are standard in a grant competition. So we'll be looking at the submissions that come forward. We'll be looking at the revenue of your organisation against the lot value. And if you meet the one-to-one ratio, then that is all well and good, and that requirement will be met. If you don't meet that ratio, there could be a number of reasons for that, and that's what we'll look to explore during the stage 2 process with you. So if you don't meet that ratio, you've got another opportunity to explain to us that actually you are financially stable and you are financially healthy and you are able to receive our funding for the duration of the grant period, effectively.
Thank you. Comment welcoming changes to Cyber Essentials Plus from the initial approach that was proposed. And then a question around what would be the position if an organisation was awarded the grant, having committed to getting Cyber Essentials Plus and then wasn't able to achieve that Cyber Essentials Plus accreditation. Would the grant have to be reassessed or a new sub-grantee found at a late stage? If that was the case, it could cause some difficulties in meeting mobilisation deadlines. So comment and a question there kind of rolled together.
Yeah, so the Cyber Essentials Plus is, as I said, it's a red line. So if your organisation can't meet that, you cannot receive MAPS funding, and that clearly has a knock-on implication. I guess we need to think through our approach in that scenario. An obvious approach, as you say, would be to get one of your partners to step up potentially, but that's something we need to work through actually, and perhaps provide some more guidance on that in due course.
Yeah. So death advice delivery under these grants will be absolutely precluded if you don't hold Cyber Essentials Plus. For delivery partners, that does mean that it could push back the date that you're able to start delivering under this grant funding, but that might mean a break in service that would need cover provided by another partner who already did have that Cyber Essentials Plus cover in place. We think that for lead organisations, given that they have got a timeline running from now, if they know that they are the potential lead grant holder, that they have got time to start making those arrangements towards getting Cyber Essentials Plus significantly before the grant award starts. So for anybody who's looking at one of those first grants, the key date for delivery wouldn't be until April 2028, so that's over 2 years away still, so plenty of time to kind of get that accreditation in place, we believe. But if it is still a challenge, we would like to know kind of the scale of the challenge for anybody who is potentially a lead organisation or for a delivery partner. There's quite a few comments coming through in relation to DBS, different positions from different organisations about the roles and the levels of checks, whether it's enhanced checks or whether it's the standard checks that will be made. So we will take the opportunity to kind of reflect on all of those comments. Yeah, so there's quite a mix of comments around DBS, but I think that's probably it for now. Just in terms of the cyber insurance, need to kind of go away and reflect what the cost would be.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Okay, well, that slide, as I say, will remain open, so do keep in the comments in there. We'll move on to the application questions themselves then. Starting with stage one, another Slido, another QR code, another code to put in. What we're interested in here, when we talk about the stage one process, we've endeavoured to make it as light touch as possible, and we think we've achieved that to an extent, but we'd really like to hear your views on whether it feels accessible to you. If any parts of it still present a challenge, please let us know. We're keen on views on the draft questions, whether they're clear enough, whether the prompts are clear, is the word count appropriate, and then in terms of the proposed assessment approach, is that clear to you? So think about that as I go through these next set of slides. So, yes, I said we're making stage one as light touch as possible. Obviously, we need to get enough information to make good decisions, but we're trying to get the balance right. We're having a two-stage approach to encourage broad participation at the outset. We're trying to reduce the burden on the sector in terms of being an applicant, but it's a good way of us assessing the core concepts ahead of filtering those 3 shortlisted ones for stage 2. Now, we shared quite high level information about this again at the summer events. You can see the slide there. On the whole, the feedback was positive from the people in the room in terms of it felt accessible, it felt like a really good mechanism. It lowers the barriers to entry, which are all the things we're trying to achieve with this. There are concerns about the amount of work entailed, the lack of big writing experience, and so on, which is something we've kept in mind when we've designed stage 1. So essentially, this is stage 1 on a page. I'll talk about what we've heard from the other events shortly, because they've already made us think about making a few tweaks to this, but I'll talk you through this first. So essentially, there's 5 assessment areas. Stage 1, we're looking at 4 questions plus a template, a financial template. Those 4 questions at the moment total 4,000 words. And of those 5 areas, we're looking to assess 2. That's questions 1 and question 3. The others, our intention as things stand, were to not assess those questions, the responses for questions 2, 4 and 5, but instead they provide us with really important context and intelligence to help us understand what support you may need further down the process. So I'll quickly go through the questions. The first question is around partnership model and delivery approach. What is your plan to provide high quality and accessible community-based debt advice services within the lot area? And then we provided 2 prompts, one to tell us about your proposed partnership model and your approach to stakeholder engagement. And then secondly, tell us about how your services will be structured, coordinated, delivered across the lot area. The word limit we've said for this is up to 2,000 words, and that's an up to figure, it's not a target, so by all means you don't have to use all those words, but I think 2,000 is about right. As I say, we are going to assess this question, but I'll talk a bit more about how we're going to do that in a moment. Question 2 is about your local knowledge and understanding, and the question is, how will you make sure your community-based debt advice service is reaching clients most in need across the lot area? And the prompts here are about key challenges facing those in need and how you've identified them, and how you intend to iterate and improve delivery over the lifetime of the grant to have the greatest impact. So we've got a word count here of up to 1,000. We're saying there, our initial intention for this question was that we weren't going to assess it because we feel as a national organisation, we're not best placed to assess local knowledge and understanding because you know much more about that than we do. But we've had some pushback on that, and I'll talk about that in a second. Third question is about suitability. Why are you the right organisation to lead this work? And the prompts are about the scale of your organisation and also your experience, be that in managing grants or contracts or delivering services or leading partnerships. Word count was proposed at 500. We've heard pretty consistently that's too low, so that's something we're going to address. But that is the other scored question, which is why I feel on reflection we do need to increase that word count to give you more opportunity against that area. Question 4 is around, it's an opportunity for you to give us your worry list, if you like. What are the challenges, concerns, gaps that you've identified that need to be addressed to successfully deliver the project? It's important for us to know that and to talk about that because it will help us understand what support you need during the stage 2 process and beyond. But we're not going to assess that. And the final part around the finances, we're providing an Excel template for you to give us really high level costs. We're not going to assess it, but we'd just like a flavour for how you intend to allocate the funding in what kind of areas, just to give us a flavour of that. So we think that is quite light to touch. We've shared it, as I say, at the previous in-person events. And the feedback we've heard quite consistently is actually on the two questions we had down as pass fail, the feedback has been actually people would prefer there to be a scoring ladder here from excellent through to unacceptable, just to help differentiate between projects. And I think that's something that's helpful to us as well. So that's a change we are minded to take, and I'll show you what the scoring ladder will look like a bit later on. The other one in green, which is another one we're more than likely to take forward, is around that word count. So 500 words for question 3, in hindsight, is too low. I think we're going to increase that to 1,500 words, maybe more, but you'll have more space to make your case against suitability, which will be assessed. And then question 2 is where we had some quite contrasting views. So as I said, we felt we wouldn't assess it because we don't have the local knowledge that you have. Some people we spoke to at the in-person events supported that and agreed with that, but others took the other approach, the other view that actually this is such an important area that we absolutely should be assessing it at stage 1. So we're not yet come to a position on this. We're keen to hear people's views today before we make a decision. We are absolutely assessing it at stage 2, but whether we need to do it at stage 1 as well is something we'll consider. So any views on that would be welcome in the Slido. That's stage 1. Erica, have you anything come through yet? I appreciate I haven't given much time for comments, but is there anything there we can talk about?
No, there's no comments as yet. Somebody is still typing, but we can come back to that at the end if people are kind of typing and putting those comments in. Unless anybody wants to kind of come off mute and ask the question now.
Okay, so I'll proceed with stage 2, and then we can do it all once at the end. Fine.
Thanks.
So final Slido. So a new QR code, another code for the website. So stage 2 is the detailed stage, really important stage. We're really keen for your views as to which of the questions I'll talk through feel the most challenging and resource intensive. When we talk about what questions are going to be weighted and scored, do they feel appropriate, fair, balanced to you? Are the word counts appropriate? Are they too high? Are they too low? And then the scoring ladder I referred to earlier, I'll show you as well, and any views on that would be welcome. So they're the things to consider. The purpose here, as I say, is the detail. This is where we get to the nuts and bolts of what you're proposing to help us to make a more thorough assessment of the risks, the partnerships and governance. And this is ultimately going to lead to us determining which projects we choose to fund and which ones we don't. We gave, again, some very high-level information at the previous in-person events in the summer. You can see that on the screen. There was support, I think, again, for the process. People felt, we do need the detail, clearly. People are concerned about the resource burden. Really keen that we give enough guidance and sufficient time, which is something we're really keen to do as well. And there are some questions around being really fair with the assessment criteria. And again, I'll share that with you now as well. So this is essentially an overview of the stage 2 assessment areas, the questions I'm going to come on to shortly. It's 4 themes we'll be looking at. You can see there's 8 questions effectively. Those 8 questions have a combined word count at this time of 19,000 words. So, a lot more detail on the stage 1. And there are a number of attachments, and I'll talk through those as I go through each question. Of those 8 questions, 4 we intend to look at on a pass-fail basis. I'll come on back to that. The other 4 are going to be weighted. They're the ones with the percentages in the column. They're the ones that are going to be assessed, and ultimately how well you do against those questions will determine whether you're successful or not. Again, we've had some good debates in the room at the in-person event so far. In terms of the pass-fail questions, those 4 there in the right-hand column, we had lots of feedback that people want to know a lot more about what constitutes a pass, what constitutes a fail, and that's absolutely something we will be providing. We haven't yet, so that's something we will share with you in due course. And then for questions 1, 2, and 6, there's been some suggestions about how we could tweak those, and I'll talk through those when we get to those questions. But again, this is all still up for grabs, so please do use Slido to get any other views logged with us for us to consider. So I'll go through the questions, then we'll pause again. So the first question is around service design and delivery. It's the highest weighted question at 30%, and also currently the highest word count at 3,500 words. The question is, describe your approach to service design and delivery throughout the grant period, explaining how you ensure accessibility, innovation, and continuous improvement, and why you believe this is the most effective approach for this lot area. And then we've provided a number of prompts. As you can see, there's 8 prompts on the screen there. Talk about how you've assessed need, how that need is going to evolve over time, how you're going to reach the clients, place-based services. Essentially, there's a lot in there, and that's the feedback we've had, that probably there's too many prompts here, and we need to rationalise that to make it really clear to you what we think is most important. So when you next see this question, I don't think there will be 8 prompts. There'll probably be 4, 5, 6, and it'll be a lot clearer. I think we're just trying to achieve too much in this question in hindsight, so that's something we'll address before we finalise. Question 2 was around partnership model. This is another assessed question weighted at 25%. Word count this time for 3,000, and I'll come back to that. But the question, well, it's a question, 2 attachments. The question is, which partners will be involved in the partnership? What will their role be, and what's the basis of their involvement, and why you've chosen them? And then the prompts are for you to tell us about each partner in terms of their responsibilities, their expertise, their resources. And then for the key delivery partners, so those larger partners, tell us a bit more about why they've been selected and the benefits they're bringing to the project. We'll also be providing a template called a sub-grantee key information template, which will be an Excel spreadsheet for you to give us the background information through all of your proposed partners, and also confirmation that they meet the eligibility checks. And then the other attachments, it's up to you to decide the form and format it takes, but we're looking for a visual illustration or diagram about how the partnership fits together. Now, the change we're going to make, I think, as a result of the feedback we've heard, is actually we've heard that from some lead organisations where they intend to have many partners, 10, 15, 20 partners, there's too many to squeeze into 3,000 words in that question 2A. So we're going to amend the key sub-grantee key information spreadsheet, and we'll share this with you in the coming weeks so you can see what it looks like. But we'll expand it so we'll cover background to each of the partner, we'll cover their eligibility criteria, and then you'll have a space to tell us about what their role will be in the project and why you've selected them. So a lot of the words you'd have to use in question 2A can actually go in the spreadsheet, which means we'll reframe what that question is for 2A, but obviously it'll be around the partnership model. So again, the change coming for this question, and we'll share that with you as soon as we finalise it. Question 3 was around management and governance. This will be a pass-fail question, indicative word count of up to 2,000. The question is, tell us about your proposal for managing the service across the partnership and why you think it's the right approach for the partnership. So the prompts you can see are around the governance arrangements, how decision-making is going to work, and how risks will be identified, mitigated and managed, and so on. So we haven't had much feedback on that question, so that's likely to stay as it is unless we hear otherwise. Question 4 is around the delivery proposal. So this is one that's going to have a question and an attachment. Both we're going to look at on a pass-fail basis. So the question is, provide an overview of your delivery proposal for the first 2 years. We're not looking for you to go beyond 2 years because no one's got a crystal ball. By focusing on those first 2 years, what are your initial priorities? And then the prompts are around your approach to staffing and resourcing, your approach to tech, systems, infrastructure, how you're going to embed and oversee quality, and your approach to risk management. And we'll provide a risk template for you there to use. We're not going to assess the risk template, but again, we need a good understanding of what you think the risks are. So that'll be the written question of up to 2,500 words. And then we're going to provide another template, a delivery plan template at this time, probably an Excel document again, for you to illustrate the timelines, milestones to ensure the project remains on track. And again, all these templates we're going to share with you ahead of time to get your feedback before we finalise them. Question 5 is on mobilisation and service transition. So indicative word count for this question of 3,000. It'll be a pass-fail for the question and also the template. The question is, describe how you'll resource and implement the service during mobilisation. to ensure readiness for commencement for the 1st of April 28. So that's for round 1. It'll be April 29 for round 2. And how you'll manage service transition and change. The prompts here around how the staffing and resourcing will be organised, the various mobilisation activity that will need to be completed, your approach to service transition and change management, and importantly, how you're going to support the workforce during that period of change. So a written question, and then there's an attachment. It won't be a different template. There'll just be a mobilisation plan tab on the delivery plan template that I mentioned on the previous question that you'll need to complete to give us a bit more information around that. So that's question 5. Question 6 is the other one where we've had a bit of feedback on, and to be honest, we're quite open when we went out to the in-person events, so we haven't yet got this question quite right. We're interested in outcomes, impact, quality and customer experience. We've said a word count of 3,000. We said we would assess it and would weight it at 25%. The question as it stands is set out the outcomes and impact you aim to achieve, how these align with the CBDA objectives, and why you believe it's the optimum approach for this partnership. But again, we've then got lots of prompts there, which I think there's probably too much in there. Now, what we have done, we did a webinar before Christmas on this subject particularly, and then after that webinar, we issued a survey to get more intelligence from the sector, get your views and input as to what this could and should look like. So after this session, again, we're going to reshare that survey link because we're still very keen to get your views before we finally finalise what this question is going to look like and what it's going to entail. So we've got some more work to do here, and that was reinforced by the feedback that we had at the in-person events. Question 7 is around the finances. There's this time a template and then a question. The template is something called a financial information document. It'll be another Excel template for you to give us more detailed breakdown of your costs. And then to accompany that, there's a question where you provide your written rationale explaining your cost allocations for years 1 and 2, and any expected changes for years 3 to 5. And tell us a bit about how your approach delivers value for money and so on. So clearly your response to that question needs to reflect both what's in the financial information document, but also what's in that delivery plan template as well. So that's going to be the final weighted and assessed question. And then finally, question 8 is just a space for those organisations at stage 1 where we identify financial concerns, as I talked about earlier. This will be a space for you to upload whatever it is you need to upload to give us the assurance that your organisation is indeed financially stable and healthy and able to receive public funds. So what format that takes is up to you, and we'll be looking at on a pass-fail basis. So that essentially is the 8 questions as things stand. The scoring ladder, so this is the scoring ladder we're now going to use at stage 1 and stage 2. Now, I've worked for many funding organisations in the past. We don't typically share this information, but we're trying to be as open and transparent as possible. So this is the scoring we're going to use. It's been tried and tested in other grant programmes Matt's had quite recently, and the scores we'll be giving, the terms, the descriptors are all there for you to look at, should they be helpful to you. It's just information we're sharing with you in the open. And that was all I was going to cover on the stage 2 part. So time for questions, Erica.
Thanks, James. That was really helpful run through those questions. Appreciate that it's a lot for people to take in. We haven't actually had any questions yet on the stage 2 process, but there are a couple of questions that maybe we could loop back to on the stage 1. Mm-hmm. So the first question relates to the question around suitability, whether that's solely about the lead partner.
Yes, for stage 1, it's all about the lead partner. Yeah, correct.
Okay. And in terms of what do we mean about the stakeholder engagement in prompt 1A? Is it service users? Is it bid partners or delivery partners or somebody else? So
yeah, so it's a combination of the two. So it's your stakeholders in terms of your clients, how you've identified who your priorities are, but also how you form the partnership. And that's something that Matthew's going to cover a bit later on.
Super. Okay. Nothing on slide at the moment for the second chunky bit, but I think we'll kind of plan a little bit to maybe open the time scale so people have got longer to consider these questions and perhaps a little bit longer to give some more feedback.
Yeah, that's fair.
So yeah.
Okay, in that case, we're moving on.
In that case, it's over to Sam, who's going to take us into the thematic sessions. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Erica, and big thanks to James and Erica. It's not always easy juggling chat and Slido, so obviously just a bit of a check before we get going. Just everyone's still here. If people can just give some thumbs up, everyone's still okay. It's always nice just to get some interactive. Lovely, thank you. That's great. So we're going to obviously move into now our thematic sessions. These are just going to be some short, quite high level overviews and basically designed to help you reflect on some of the core areas that are going to shape your partnership. So you may or may not have, when you signed up for this webinar, had selected some bite size, but actually what we built upon and what we did looking at our in-person events is identifying some 4 key theme areas that we thought it was important to deliver at all the events and then also at this webinar that build on the information that you've just heard regarding the application. So there's going to be 4 themes that we're just going to discuss in this next section. It's going to be around service design, it's going to be partnership formation, workforce wellbeing, and then we're going to look at finances. So I'll be passing back to Erica for that bit. Obviously, just before I get kind of then into the content, this is a bit of a reminder for organisations that are going to fall into round 2. This, like I said, is just a brief look at some of these detailed themes. For the round 2 areas, we will certainly be having some more in-depth sessions that will fall part of next financial year. So there'll obviously then be the space for more discussion, more exploration, and then obviously regional specific planning. But please just see this today as an intro to some of these themes and some of the prompts that we've included. And obviously this is certainly not the full picture. James, you okay just to move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I'm going to talk through what will be the service design fundamentals, and then to that'll be the approach to technology. I'll then hand over to Matthew, who'll cover partnership formation, and he'll also talk to you about workforce wellbeing. So James, if you're okay to move then to, yeah, perfect. So, and then again, if you could move on to the next one, that would be great as well. So what we mean by service design then, so looking at this first theme area. So when we talk about service design, we're kind of looking at 3 connected components. So first and foremost, and most importantly, it's clients. So it's who you're reaching, what their experience is, and whether you're meeting the needs of those most in need. People, obviously, whether that's advisors, your wider workforce, it's ensuring that they've got the tools and the systems, processes and support that they're obviously going to need to deliver this confidently. And then processes, they are all the operational structures, pathways and systems that will make the service run well today. Day to day. Some of you on this call today may have joined our webinar on service design that took place back in November. Again, if you weren't able to join that, the links to all the recordings are on our CBDA website. And again, we can share the links in the chat at the end of this session, if that would be helpful. But again, that was a more focused, in-depth session on service design. So this part now is just building on some of that and thinking about some of the key areas that you're going to need to consider when putting in your proposal. So obviously, just before I kind of touch then upon this first section on developing your strategic vision, obviously in the service design and kind of building on some of what we heard in the in-person events, kind of think the one thing that we consistently heard is that this is about designing delivery models that feel locally owned, but also whilst then offering a consistent core experience across the partnerships. That's kind of some of the findings that we had from some of the regional events. So it's that balance between that local flexibility and then combining that with some shared standards. So obviously the starting point for that then is developing what your strategic vision for the service might be. So obviously a key part of your early thinking is how the service will operate across your lot. So that includes an understanding of the debt need and the geography. So obviously recognising some of you on the call today, you might have an area that's a mix of urban, rural or coastal communities. So what then the needs of those clients in those areas are going to be is going to vary considerably. You'll then need to think about how you'll work with existing CBDA providers. So what might want to stay, what you might want to change as a lead in your area, and where maybe new partners or specialisms might add strength to what your proposal and what your strategic vision is setting out to do. And then you'll have to think about and decide where you may want consistency, and that might be consistency across all of the partners, or where it may be more appropriate to locally tailor what that service will deliver, as opposed to having that consistent approach. And obviously both will be appropriate and add value, but that will be for you as a lead to decide. So kind of fundamentally from our perspective, obviously there is no right model. It's about what matters is your rationale, you having that clear reasoning, it being intentional, and kind of the insight that sits behind what your strategic vision is for the service that you intend to deliver. Next slide, please, James. So obviously then moving on from setting and designing that strategic division, it's then thinking about how you're going to develop your delivery model. So it's turning that vision then into what will be the BAU of your service, that delivery model. And that's fundamentally when you are going to have to map out what the component parts of your service are going to be. So you'll be looking at all elements of what that service will cover: engagement, the triage, advice delivery, quality assurance, training, compliance, systems. And then as part of doing that, you're going to need to determine who delivers what. So thinking about that strategic vision and then designing your delivery model. And Matthew will come on to this in his section around the partnership formation. But a key consideration will be, well, who will be delivering what part of this service for us? Who is going to be leading on what model? Where might be there some specialisms that you wish to draw upon, and then how the partners in delivering the model are going to work together, and what functions might you need to introduce to enable the service to operate. So another a consideration in this is where you may choose to place advisor teams. You might have some partnerships that will have advisors embedded locally. Other leads may opt for a model where there is more of a centralised hub model with local partners focused on engagement and then advisors located out in those areas. Obviously, both options could work, but what matters is you having that delivery model and how it aligns to your strategic vision, and going back and kind of covering all of those areas. So who is delivering what, where your specialisms may be, how the partners will work together, and then how the enabling functions will operate. Next slide, please, James. Thank you. So then, obviously then, what follows that then is managing your delivery model. So you've obviously then got to think about, well, how are you going to manage it? What is going to be the oversight and management as a lead of this ultimate delivery model for your service? Within that, you're going to have to think about performance management, quality oversight. Is there a clear accountability and escalation routes within the model for how you oversee some of those more challenging areas? What will the role of the lead organisation be versus then the individual delivery partners or even wider supply chain partners that might make up the model in its entirety? But I think being fundamentally really clear on what the lead will be and what their role will be, and then making that clear will be an integral part of effectively setting up the delivery model and then managing that model well from the very beginning. And then in that again is then obviously the suppliers. So how any suppliers or even third parties will be managed. It may be that some of the suppliers or third parties that are a key part of how this model is delivered for you as a lead, actually an existing relationship may exist with one of your delivery partners. So actually they may be best placed in managing that supplier or that third party on your behalf. It may not necessarily need to be the lead, it may not necessarily fall to them as their area to lead on. It may be that they don't have the specialisms that you might consider are necessary to manage a relationship like that, in which case it may go to a partner instead of the lead. So it's just ensuring that you've then got those models in place and are thinking through how are you then going to manage and oversee it. And then finally, I think in reflecting on what your service design might be, you are going to have to consider technology. It's going to underpin almost everything that you will do. And the key elements that you're going to need to consider, as kind of set out on this slide, are your systems. So you might want to consider, are you going to use a shared case management system, or are you going to integrate multiple local platforms? So it could be that you have got quite a diverse partnership or using a range of different case management systems. What approach are you going to take into that in that respect? And then linked to that then will be, what will your data security and process be? And obviously in the session today, we've already given you an update on the position regarding Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus and the requirements that will be needed for that. And obviously a big part of that is then the processes that you would, as leads, will have in place to oversee that data security and that compliance. Then linked to that, it's obviously then the investment. So like, it's about the technology that will underpin your service. What funding might you require to maintain those systems longer term? What might you require to consider any future upgrades or changes that you might want to make, both as a lead and then across that partnership? And then really importantly is obviously then how your technology is utilised to fundamentally support that best service possible for clients and also for your workforce experience. So how might it improve customer journeys? How could it reduce administrative burden for your advisors? So all of those things you may want to be thinking about when deciding on what technology model you're going to have that complements that service that you've designed. But again, it's starting from your strategic vision, your delivery model, and then thinking about what's the most effective use of technology to best deliver our model for this service. That's it from me. I'm now going to pass over to Matthew, who's going to cover the partnership formation.
Thank you very much, Sam. So just to set the scene for this partnership formation, we know when we came out in the earlier engagement events last year, we were talking about different models, A, B, and C. And we want to be really clear that when we're talking about partnership formation in this space, we are using a little p here because the model you may end up with or you're looking for could be very, very different comparing on what your area is, your thoughts, your planning. We want to be completely clear. You tell us the model that will work best for you. We're just going to try and use that term of partnership to encompass all possible models. So we can have the next slide, James. So you're going to see a little bit of repetition here between some of the stuff from service design and also flowing into partnerships, because these two aspects could go either way. You could have service design as your main focus and then move into partnership, or vice versa, setting out what your partnership looks like and then going into service design. So we felt it was key to come to these topics nice and early on. Now, a big part when we're looking at this is when identifying partners, what's the boundary of this partnership going to be? So not necessarily just who is going to be in the partnership, but what type of organizations are going to be in the partnership. Will that you have formal agreements with these partners for service delivery? Will it be slightly more informal? As we've talked about earlier with those engagement type relationships or triage type relationships, will different partners have different levels of where they sit within this partnership? And will you manage those through a more kind of buyer-supplier type relationship? And that ties nicely into then thinking about the formality of any of these partnerships arrangement. When you're setting up, will you be using memorandums of understanding, partnership agreements? Will there be a mix of this? And then again, while traditionally this is handled through sub-grants, how will the lead look to be doing this, of flowing this down? Will it be through sub-grant agreements and flowing that down? Or will other commercial arrangements be considered? A big thing for me when you're looking at this kind of area for partnerships is looking to build that flexibility in at these early stages and looking to see how you consider conflict at these early stages. If you design for the bad days now at these very, very early stages, hopefully when they arise, and they will, something will go wrong, because this is a long-term approach now. This isn't short-term grant funding, this is long-term. Thinking about what that flexibility will be and where your service might be in year 1 versus year 2 versus year 9, and having that flexibility consideration when you're thinking about these things. Moving on to then roles and responsibilities. It could be a top-down approach where the lead deals with everything, or you may already have partner organizations within this model that actually have specific skills, specific expertise, and how these could feed into both your staffing approach and for any change management processes. And all of this then comes back to the final point we've got here for this identifying partners of making sure that in that selection, who gets to be in the partnership model and what makes those organisations a good fit for what you're looking to deliver from your service design and for what you're looking to do with building this partnership. So next slide, please, James. So we've covered off the early stages then, identifying the partners, putting that groundwork in of what you think things should be. For us, the next stage then is consideration around the governance and the decision making that then go into this partnership. So things like the policy and process development and where the ownership of those sit. What will the grant holder be looking for their approach to policies and the processes, and will they look for harmonisation or consistency across the partnership for different organisations? There's that balance between alignment of making sure everyone's policies are roughly in line with the high-level themes, or mandating consistent policies across the partnership. And within that, would there be key policy areas that would really be high-level that stuff should be focused on when you're bringing these ideas together and bringing this partnership formation? Moving on from that is then the consideration around oversight and the accountability for that oversight. So we use in MAPS the language of controls environments, but essentially this is audit processes and making sure that those are set out. But how would you make sure where that effective oversight sits? How much would sit with the grant holder? How much sits with partnership within that? And would there be any responsibilities that could be shared out amongst those partners? Things like compliance, business continuity, risk, escalation processes. If the lead already has significant expertise in these areas, the lead grant holder may be comfortable in having those all designed in-house, but there may already be specific partners or key partners within this partnership formation that have got significant skills in this area where responsibilities and oversight could potentially be shared out and therefore lessening the load on the lead as a whole. And then that flows nicely into then thinking about decision making of where is that formal decision making going to be? Will it be a top-down approach from the lead? Will there be more formal structures that the partnership might look at, such as steering groups or partnership boards, of making it key where decisions for certain areas can be made and where decisions may need more transparency to make sure that there is that buy-in and essentially any scrutiny that comes from the partners back up to the lead can be answered before it gets to that level of possible risk or escalation processes. Last few bits for then governance and decision making is consideration around data processing control, which is just simply who are your data controllers, who are your data processors, and mapping that out for when things like data rights requests and right to be forgotten requests come in, of how those can be handled and what the process might be. And then the final point here for this governance and decision making as you're building into this partnership and getting things ready for your delivery stage is your partnership model going to be looking at a shared brand or identity? And will you be looking at some governance that then can support the kind of behaviours and values that you want to instill across this? Because this is a new thing. This shouldn't be seen as this is the same BAU model that's been working for the last 20 odd years. This is a chance to do something new, something different, obviously within line of the criteria, but you guys and your organisations know these areas better. So your insight and what comes into this is what we really value and really want to see coming out in this grant process. And then final slide, James, thank you. And now we've gone through identifying the partners, we've gone through what the governance might look like, so we're now into that BAU space. So this is post-grant award, this is the operational stuff, this is the delivery. So consideration for things like communication and how that would be handled across the partnership. How do you handle that information sharing? How much buy-in and regular meetings do you want with the partners? How would you think about things like that information sharing both from MAPS down across your supply chain, but then also from that supply chain going back up to MAPS to give visibility of how things are going? Because again, this is a new space. Would you look at processes that could bring partners in so they can provide information and feedback, and for bringing ways to bring colleagues in from the partnership so that there are meetings where colleagues working in similar roles can network, share information and share that communication, which can help drive things forward? We think it'd be key for you to look at developing and maintaining effective and high-performing culture and to try and map out what that might look like from the very early stages, because setting the tone for the culture of your partnership and setting where the diversity of your partnership can be captured and celebrated could help bring this partnership forward and make sure it's a strong and improving partnership over the duration of this long-term funding opportunity. And a big part of that is then things like continuous improvement. We've touched on it with Sam's slides around service design and technology, but a climate of continuous improvement where new innovations can be allowed to be fostered and to grow, and given that space where these could lead on to things. And then the final bit within all of this around partnership formation is thinking specifically for the leads, managing and leading this effectively. We've touched on it with where responsibilities might sit in formal partners, supply partners, but then looking back at things of, if this is all now in that BAU space, how could partners potentially be involved in assessing and reviewing the effectiveness at various touch points of this partnership model as it is delivering? Because again, I'm going to stress it one last time, this is 9 years potentially worth of funding. What works for you on day one may not be the same stuff that is going to be working for you on day 101, 301, and so forth. That's pretty much everything we've got for you today around partnership. Obviously, we're happy to take any questions from the chat and we'll pick these up in a Q&A at the end. But for now, I'm going to move on to our next one, which is now moving away from that service and partnership stuff. And we're now looking at the workforce, the well-being, and the development of the partnership as it's in this BAU space. So first topic we've got on here is around developing your workforce and considerations that we think you may want to take on board or have discussions around, both for those of you in round one who are getting very, very close to those application stage going live, and especially for those of you in round two who potentially have more time to now bring these conversations into active discussion with potential partners and with potential leads when you're designing those partnership models. Now, things that we think you should want to consider is things around recruitment, retention, and possible talent pipelines. We've seen examples from engagement events that we've done in person from this round one, where things like recruitment has actually been handled for the entire partnership by a single organisation because of the systems, processes, and staffing they've got in place. And they've been able to see a much better level of recruitment, more efficiencies, and better retainment from that recruitment process of the staff coming into the partnership. But then obviously there's considerations with that one size might not fit all. There will be niche partners who work with a specific client group. There'll be those who are urban, those who are rural, and maybe that one size fits all recruitment process won't necessarily work. But regardless of those, thinking about things like talent pipelines and that progression system, which tucks on nicely to the next point. But where do trainee advisors come in? Where can they get practical experience alongside the theory? And is there that process where you can try and map training requirements across the partnership? Obviously, there's existing MAPS accredited pathways out there, but would there be something different that your partnership would want to fit in, which specifically fits either specialisms within the partnership or those niche areas that really drive what your partnership is trying to do for its values and its identity? And then further details around that progression and development, thinking about things like development pathways, secondments, and opportunities where staff don't necessarily just sit within one organisation. There's opportunities to work alongside other organisations or potentially working with that lead organisation for ways that can develop, can move forward, can innovate new ideas within that partnership and build that pool of experienced, highly trained staff, which then benefits the partnership. Now, a big consideration is the centralisations of roles and which roles potentially could sit as a centralised role within the partner, so with the lead partner, which ones would be more spread out and where specialisms could come in. Now, a big thing that we've seen coming out from across these events and what we've seen from current delivery partners is things like different levels of roles, not just focusing on those standard trainees, advisors, supervisors, managers, but things like data analysts, business analysts, people who specialise in engagement, people who specialise in communication and marketing and promotion, and whether these are the kind of roles that may be needed in this partnership and could be sitting within this development space, either for advisors to progress into and learn skills, or as those more specialised, centralised roles that we've talked about. And then finally for here, again, we've mentioned controls environment for partnerships, but for the workforce environment, it's to think around, while things like quality of advice and performance and KPIs will always be set there as part of the grant, but would there be anything beyond that? Would there be any other workforce audits that you as potential leads, you as potential delivery partners will be looking at and potentially thinking around where future training opportunities could sit within this space? Thank you, James. Oh. So now we're just going to quickly touch on thinking about workforce transition. And we've got two main points on here on this workforce transition. This is a huge opportunity, but it's also a huge change. This is going from 20 years of fairly stabilized systems where it's kind of BAU and everyone knows what the approach is. And we're now moving into this space of there's potentially a lot of staff who are already working in match funded roles who may now be looking at 2P if a new lead is coming in. And when you're thinking around this kind of area is what's that transition going to look like? How can that be handled? That existing workforce should have a huge amount of experience, but that could be very different across the supply chain, very different across partners, existing partners are delivering versus new partners coming into this space. What kind of engagement would you be looking at for the staff that are coming into this to support that continuity, minimize disruption as much as possible? And obviously then reviewing things like training and knowledge bases. What kind of standardization would you need to make sure that this new workforce is coming in at the level needed for the set requirements of this grant? And specifically for then potential leads, where would you make sure that you have that surety that all partners at a defined date are working to that same understanding within this area? And leading on from that, the other bit around transition is data and cybersecurity, because again, as we said, this is a new thing. There'll be lots of people coming into this from existing systems, potentially coming in from new systems, and then thinking around data and cybersecurity, going back to stuff we touched on in Sam's session earlier around that technology. And if you're having shared platforms or shared CRM systems, will we be looking at any specific training which focuses on these areas to make sure that you have the oversight, especially because of that requirement for Cyber Essentials Plus? And then if you do have shared systems or shared processes, thinking about any audit processes or testing that may be needed across this to make sure that that same level is being maintained across this new partnership as a whole and not just for certain key individuals. And then the good news is, final slide from me, and then we'll be handing over to Erica to cover off the finance stuff. So you're almost done with me, thankfully. Big consideration for us, we've highlighted it in previous, and there's been lots of pieces of work that have come out across this, across the sector over the years, both from MAPS and both from independents, but thinking around that workforce well-being and what kind of things can we put in place to make that stable, confident and high-performing partnership model and have that buy-in from staff. Points we thought were worth raising is that workforce structure and how that aligns to your delivery model. So advisor, supervisory, specialist roles, the distribution of those, and where some of those functions potentially can sit centrally, as we've touched on in earlier points. But then how consistency can be managed across those to make sure it doesn't matter where each advisor is, each manager is, each supervisor is, they are able to perform consistently to their roles, and the lead can have faith that there is consistency. And then thinking about things of where volunteer support could be actively encouraged. And then, of course, this is a new opportunity. This is a new model. This is long-term funding. Is there anything that you want to look at around fair pay principles or salary, maybe involving specific advice sector benchmarks for what those salaries might be? Just coming now on to consistency and flexibility. Again, you're coming into something new. These are two areas you'll need to very finely balance, but workforce processes being consistent across all partners, such as induction, training expectations, CPD and supervision. Would you also need to make sure you maintain some flexibility within some local partners where their approach and the service that offering they've got is very different to other partners? We're not saying it needs to be every one of your delivery partners needs to be doing the exact same service. If there's specific client groups, if there's specific diversities within your supply model, within your partnership that you really want to be reaching out to and nailing, are there things that you can add certain levels of flexibility around various workforce structures, workforce well-being, processes, and things like that. And then the final point for us is that actual supporting workforce well-being, making sure that you've got some set practices, employment support programs, peer support, but there's some consideration around how that workforce can be supported, their main well-being can be maintained, and we think it's really valuable to look at setting that positive culture from those early stages and trying to set that across those different organisations. And that can come down to simple things like advisors feeling supported as being part of the partnership whole, instead of just being part of a single organisation, and whether there's that networking space or advisor collaboration space that you can build in, which can also then take some well-being aspects and strengthen your partnership across this long-term opportunity. The good news is that is my section's done for today. The bad news is I'm now going to pass you over to Erica, who's going to tell you how much this will all cost. So over to you, Erica.
Not quite tell you how much this is all going to cost. Before we go into the slides, I'd just kind of like to set the context for this particular slot around finances, because getting the finances right, it sets you up for everything from your kind of grant application, but also through to your delivery. So the finances are really closely linked to all of those aspects that we've already talked about: the service design, the workforce, the technology, the governance. In terms of stage one, James has already talked about looking for indicative budgets to say what the spread is across the different spend categories for your service. And then at stage two, we'll be assessing that financial rationale for why you're spending the money on the things that you're choosing to spend it on. I think the thing to say that really matters from us, from our perspective, is that your financial planning needs to reflect the realities of delivering tailored community-based debt advice services, your structure, your partners, the geography of your lot, and some of the support functions that you will choose to centralise or distribute. So the other thing to say is that we are well aware from the market engagement that we've been doing over the last few months and over the last year, that in a lot of places you are not currently able to cover your costs for service delivery from the current MAPS grant. And that's something that we want to make sure there is an opportunity to put right with this new funding approach and new grants. So we know that for services to be sustainable, to platform that flexible, community sensitive service, that you need to have full cost recovery in place for all delivery partners, not just for the lead grant holder, but making sure that all of the delivery partners are able to cover their costs in delivering the service. So we also know and recognise that in the short term that could mean that we are able to fund fewer advisors, for example, than we do currently. But we also would say that this is an opportunity to kind of do a full reset in terms of the cost base, whether you're an incumbent provider who is looking to be a future lead grant holder, or whether you're in one of those regions where there will inevitably be a change in the lead grant holder, where national organisation has previously held the grant, then we'd really kind of encourage you to re-baseline and to get in place all of the costs of the service delivery model that you propose to take forward. So that provides some of the context for this. I'll go straight to the little diagram that's at the bottom of this slide. Essentially, what we want to make sure is that every potential delivery partner in this application process has the chance to kind of not just to start the match, but to see the match through. And we think that the best way to do that is to make sure that you are getting getting your application on a sound financial footing from the offset. So thinking about your kind of cost structures then, you start with the basics of what it takes to deliver a community-based service, but also would challenge you to think about some of those costs that could potentially be shared across a whole partnership. So talking about some of the CRM systems, some of the data collection that's required for reporting, whether the training costs could be centralised, and some of your data security, IT infrastructure, or your quality assurance are those things that could help to support consistency, reduce duplication and simplify the governance. You'll also need to think collaboratively about some of your cost assumptions. So there will be salary differences in some places. Are you happy to support those differences in salary on a long-term basis? They may be in place at the beginning of a 9-year grant agreement, but do you have an ambition to maybe potentially take salaries to an equal footing across the whole of your region or sub-region to avoid the risk of kind of advisor churn moving from one provider to another in order to get a slightly better salary with a different local advice provider who is part of the same partnership? So those are the challenges you need to think about. What do you start with on day one, and where would you like to get to? Thinking about the differences, sorry, James, just to flick back, just thinking about the differences between rural versus urban delivery, who have different kind of property costs, if you have different IT and infrastructure costs, or whether you're buying particular specialist services from one partner over another. So if one partner is doing training on behalf of the wider partnership, that might lead to a different cost model if they are working more slowly so that they've got the time to give feedback to any training advisors who are taking longer to give advice in those initial stages. What we really want to make sure is for mobilisation as well. There may be different cost considerations for any new organisations who have never received MAPS funding before. We want to make sure that that doesn't represent a barrier to those organisations potentially being a part of your partnership, because what we want to make sure is that we get the right partners in place to get you off to a good start. So if you want to go on to the next slide, please. So in terms of your financial model, we know that a really good financial model is essential in terms of giving that resilience across your partnership. You'll want to consider first how the funding is going to flow across and between partners, whether allocations should be based on demand, presenting demand, is it on the levels of need that are based on some of the MAPS data that we're able to share with you, or is it about the capacity to support providers? Will it be different for different partners, whether you're providing a particularly niche specialist service or whether you're providing a kind of mainstream open door service? For example, if you're providing a service that deals with people who are in complex mental health care settings, it may be that your capacity is able to help fewer people, but you're helping them to potentially a greater level of intensity and over a greater period of time. In terms of your allocations, so where you start funding, are those going to be fixed for the full grant period, or are you going to build in review points as circumstances change? Think about what those review points might be. Will it be, if there is a new town that's built or a new development that's built that significantly shifts the pattern of demand for services across the lifetime of the agreement? Would it be something like that, or would it be about partners who are, significantly have queues out the door as compared to other partners who are managing to meet their demand locally? Think about payment terms. MAPS will pay upfront for its delivery of services and against mobilisation milestones during that mobilisation period, but you need to think about how that flows through to your partners. Some partners might need to be paid monthly or quarterly. Have smaller partners got a need for advance payments to support their cash flow? So essentially, the objective here is about creating a model that enables partners to plan confidently, maintain their stability, and is fair and adaptable across the term of the service or the term of the grant. So moving on to the last slide then. The other thing that's really important in financial terms is knowing what your plan is for monitoring. Financial oversight will become increasingly important as the delivery of the service progresses. You'll need to have systems in place to monitor performance, financial performance, identify any risks and support your decision making. So if you have overspend or underspend, you'll need to think about what do you do with that overspend and underspend. What will your approach be? Will it be devolved to local partners to be able to choose how they spend that, or will the money come back into the centre of the partnership so that you can decide as an overall partnership where is the most appropriate space to spend that? Will you put in place levels where that kind of devolved authority will be local, or will you have a kind of tolerance or will you determine that you need to bring that back in centrally? Think about what your financial reporting is going to look like, what your financial audits might require. Will you do spot checks to make sure that spend that's being reported is followed through and can be kind of followed through from people's accounts? Will you do thematic reviews across different partners that might consider, for example, during the lifetime of the agreement, how much different partners are spending on training, where those variances are and why? So what will your approach be? Think about kind of escalation routes that you might need, how you'll support a partner who's experiencing financial difficulty, which could happen over the lifetime of the agreement. And then really we're encouraging you to kind of look ahead towards sustainability and future developments. How will you budget for things like ongoing improvements? We've got things like the Debt and Device Modernisation Fund, the Debt and Device Transformation Fund, which could lend financial support, but that would require that they're still there and in place. We hope they are, but you will need to think about, in terms of the possibilities for things like tech upgrades, workforce development or service innovation. How will you budget for that within your partnership? Will you want to set aside an amount of money that is available for that innovation each year as part of your overall budget? Or is it something that you're going to kind of deal with and apply for alternative funding to help evolve and remain resilient over time? So those are some of the big questions, I think, in terms of the finances. We're not expecting you to have answers for any of those things immediately, but really just encouraging you to go away and reflect on what those things might mean for your partnership. And the earlier you can start that thinking, the better, both in terms of this and the other slides which have been kind of presented this afternoon, since the eligibility questions and the draft application questions. So if you want to take us on to the next slide as well, please, James. Just a reminder again that details of all the previous market engagement sessions going all the way back to December 24, they're all on our CBDA webpage. You can see how things have evolved over time. We have also got an ask in terms of the feedback on the key performance indicators, the evaluation, learning and data needs. That's an area where we're particularly keen to get your feedback so that we can finalise the KPIs. The survey on data and evidence is not open, contrary to what we've been saying to people as we've gone around the country. We've discovered that has actually closed. The person who can unlock that for us is on leave until next week, but we will reopen that survey on data and evidence so that you can give us input into the kind of needs and difficulties that there may be with some of the performance indicators which were proposed in that session. So please do watch that back if you haven't already. If you want to just head on, we've already mentioned those bid writing webinars. Those will be widely publicised. We expect a total of 60 places in total for those sessions. We know that they are likely to be significantly oversubscribed. It is, it's quite expensive training to get training for how to write a good bid. We are putting that on as independent training because clearly as MAPS we can't mark our own homework, but we are in the process of procuring that supplier, and as soon as we have the dates for those sessions we will share them and open registration. I am happy to kind of open up for Q&A, any questions. I know there was one question from you, Alice, around whether there was an expectation of a democratic partnership model. happy to answer that one, which is that we tested quite significantly whether there was an appetite to put in place formal structures for a kind of democratic model which consulted with partners, had a steering committee and the like over the summer. It's fair to say that we had quite mixed feedback on that. And as a result, we have decided that we aren't going to kind of insist on a specific delivery or partnership model. What we are really encouraging people to do is to reflect on how they build in that kind of consultation and collaboration into their proposal. But we're also not mandating that. But as you can see from the questions in the application process, how people are working with their partners will be key to answering those questions well. So it's going to be important that providers are in a position to be able to answer that. Given that we're also encouraging building these services from the ground up, if you are working with a potential lead partner and you really, are concerned about the approaches that they're taking, you don't have to work with those potential lead partners. You have an option to kind of explore who else might be a potential lead partner and whether they would be prepared to work in a more collaborative way if that isn't what you're getting from somebody who is putting themselves forward as a lead partner. So I'm very happy to kind of pick up on that if there's any kind of follow-up you want to come back with, having heard that. Okay, don't have any questions in the chat that I can see. If there are no further questions, then it just remains for me to point to that final slide, which gives you the MAPS commercial mailbox email address. If you have got any questions, please do put them through to the commercial mailbox, commercial@maps.org.uk. We will pick them up as we go along, and please do keep an eye on your inbox for the updates. You'll get a link to the video recording of this session, and we will reissue the slides based on a request that was in the chat earlier. So thank you very much for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day.